So, due to a popular request, I'm actually going to do a cricket breeding video, and I'm going to show you how to take a couple of tubs of crickets, I'm actually only going to use 2, and turn it into potentially hundreds if not thousands of crickets. So that's right guys, well, I've been down to the pet shop and I've grabbed myself a couple of boxes of large crickets. These ones are just from Pisces. Obviously there's multiple brands out there depending on where you live, different types of crickets and all sorts. I did get 3 boxes, but I am going to use a box just to kind of feed off to a few animals because I don't have many larges kicking around. Things are kind of quietening down anyway, so I don't have too many animals that are actually still hungry. But what I want to do is I want to start up a different generation of crickets just to kind of break through the cycle of what I've got currently. And I'm going to use 2 boxes of crickets here to essentially do that for me. Now, some of you might be wondering why I'm only using such a little amount of crickets. And to be honest, the one thing that I have found is sometimes overpopulating your cricket tubs when you're doing it in a smaller circumstance, you know, like a little home breeding system like what I've got here. You can actually overpopulate your cricket tubs for breeding purposes, so I actually find it's better to use essentially around 50 to 100 adult crickets, thereabouts. So the first thing I'm going to show you is essentially just how to set up the actual adult crickets to get them breeding and happy and doing what they need to do to essentially start, you know, making little cricket babies. Okay, so you can see here I've got a tub basically just with a whole bunch of cardboard in here. Don't know what that zip tie's from, but you know, that doesn't have to live in there. Anyway, so yeah, we've got a tub, whole bunch of cardboard. I like to essentially stack my cardboard up vertically like this, just so then any cricket poo or bug poo can essentially fall down through the gaps a little bit easier. And I actually don't mind using some flat pieces of cardboard in between just to kind of help space things out a little bit. It just helps a little bit better for airflow and such. Now, you'll notice that I've kind of got like a whole bunch of little pieces down in here. This is basically just because I'm going to put the egg tray, or where they're going to essentially lay their eggs, deposit their eggs, up here so it can be a little bit elevated off the ground itself. And then we're going to put the water down here. So as far as food for my crickets, the one thing that I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to limit the amount of work that I do with my crickets, because a lot of people do know that they're a lot of work, or they can be a lot of work if you make them a lot of work. But the way that I'm trying to show you how I keep my crickets going is essentially minimal effort on my behalf to try to get healthy, happy crickets. Now, the food that I actually use is actually a chicken pellet. So it's a chicken pellet. I'll put up a photo here or something like that. It's one that I get from Pet Stock. It's a pretty cheap pellet, but essentially it looks like this. This is just an old protein jar of mine, but it's just like a little grain pellet like this. So essentially that is the food that I decided to use. I have done multiple different options. I've done dog foods, I've done, you know, wet food diets and such like that, but I am essentially trying to make it as easy as possible for myself. So as far as setting up these adults, essentially all I use are like a little plant saucer like this. For the adults, I'll only use 1 saucer, and as we get to the kind of like the raise up stage, I'll show you how I kind of feed off those guys as well. I'll just take a little bit of food like this. Anything uneaten can just go into, you know, some grow out crickets or something like that. Essentially these adults, they're only going to be with me for like under a week, and then I'll probably feed off the adults. So I'm just trying to use them to get eggs and, you know, that next generation of crickets essentially happening. So essentially I've got just my little saucer here of just this little chicken pellet. I'm just going to place that in on top of the cardboard that's actually inside of this tub. Now, as far as water goes, I've been watching a lot of videos on different breeders and stuff like that. And, you know, some people will do things like, you know, potatoes, carrots, orange slices, such like that. But the one video that really stood out to me was this like mass producing cricket farmer that was in United States. It was in like New York or something like that. And essentially he had a watering system that required like a cotton rope that was wicking. So when I saw his system, he was doing it on like a factory scale, so I didn't want to do anything like that, but I tried to come up with my own sort of solution. And you know, I don't know if this is, I'm assuming it's been done before, but essentially I've got myself a little tub of water here. This is about a 500ml tub just from Kmart. I've cut a little hole in the top and I've got a piece of cotton rope. So it's very important that it's cotton because cotton will actually wick up. So if I touch all along here, this is all nice and moist and the crickets can come along and drink out of that. Now you can see there that I've got actually like a little bit of mesh that's essentially, this is essentially, so when I put this in the cricket tub, it kind of sits on top of the cardboard and doesn't come in contact with the cardboard, because if the wet rope comes in contact with the cardboard, it ends up just like a big moldy, messy, horrible situation. So anyway, I'll show you how I kind of pop this in this little cricket raising tub or this breeding tub, and yeah, you'll get a bit of a better picture for it. Okay, so you can see that I got my food in there, and essentially all I'm going to do is place this watering container down like this. Doesn't really have to be too fancy or accurate or anything like that, and there's no sort of rhyme or reason to it. You just want to make sure that it's off the cardboard, and the crickets can obviously climb to it, so they'll be able to hop up onto here, drink any sort of water off the wicking rope there. And you could make this bigger. You could do a different version of this where you used a bigger container, but essentially that water there should be enough to last me at least a month without actually checking the water for these crickets. That will kind of vary a little bit just due to how many crickets, what sort of temperatures the tubs are being kept in, etc. But that gives you a bit of a rough idea. As I kind of said already, these crickets, these 2 boxes of crickets, they're going to be here for like under a week. And then essentially we're going to just be popping them, into animal enclosures and feeding them off, because they're adult crickets, so they're already kind of coming towards the end a little bit anyway. I will kind of mention now quickly too, when you are selecting your crickets, it's important to make sure that you're getting some boxes that are happy, healthy, fresh, really make sure that they actually look like they're decent crickets. The other thing to kind of take into consideration too is sometimes you can get crickets that are actually old, so they're already past their breeding stage. And the way you can tell that is generally they're not chirping too much, they're kind of a little bit quiet and such. But as you can hear from these 3 boxes that I've got here at the moment, they're going pretty good, like they're chirping quite a lot. And to be honest, when I got these yesterday and I left these in these boxes just to kind of, do this video today, they were chirping the house down last night. So they're like primed, ready to go for breeding. So that's what you really want to make sure you're listening out for. Not just kind of like those first kind of chirps coming into when they're starting to get ready to breed, or those kind of like last kind of chirps as they're kind of done with their breeding cycle. You want them to be kind of like full swing. Sometimes it can be a little bit hit and miss too, so you kind of have to get a little bit of an ear for it. But it's not that hard, if you kind of just come into your home and you're like, oh man, the crickets seem really loud today, time to chuck in an egg box, then you kind of know that today's probably a good day to start breeding your crickets. So as far as your egg containers go, or your egg deposit box, whatever you want to call them, where the crickets are going to lay the eggs, so then you get these little tiny pinheads like all these guys that you can see up here. Basically I just use a black takeaway container. I just get these from Kmart. They're super cheap. They're like $7 for 10 of them or something like that, so you can kind of have them on the go a fair bit. This is all just full of cocoa peat too. Some people like peat moss, some people like mixes of sand and stuff. This is just cheap. It seems to work for me. And as you can kind of see, it's a little bit hard because these guys are pretty tiny, but there's actually hundreds and hundreds of pinheads in this enclosure here. This is kind of like just like a little temporary setup that I've got going. You can see a few little ones hopping around in there. But if I was to give these a bit of a whack out, without trying to, loose too many in the house, because they will probably grow up eventually. This kind of gives you like a little bit of a rough idea of one hatch. Yeah, so you can see there that there is hundreds, if not thousands, out of those 2 tubs that I had. That's a lot of little baby crickets. So I'm just going to pop these bits of cardboard back in here. You can see I've already just kind of chucked in some food in there for them. That'll keep them going nice and happy and healthy. And I'll just pop one of these containers back in, because I think this one was kind of one of the later ones, so there's still a few crickets kind of hatching out. So that'll be a next sort of cycle of food, so to speak. So with these tubs, when you do kind of set them up, I personally do try to make them pretty moist, and the reason for that is if they dehydrate, then the eggs go bad. So you want them to kind of be reasonably wet and kind of feel a little bit heavy. I wouldn't say like sopping wet, and you don't want to be pouring water out of it, but you want there to be some weight behind it to make sure that you are actually kind of, almost able to kind of hold a form with your medium per se. Like you want to be able to, for lack of a better term, make it like a little bit more like sandcastle consistency. You know, you could actually kind of like hold a shape with it, so to speak. If you kind of like ball it up, you know, you can actually shape it a little bit. Yeah, I don't know how else to describe it. You will have to kind of like learn your way and try to figure out how it is. But that being said, I will reuse this medium a few times before I decide to discard it if it gets too manky. So I'll probably get like 3 or 4 uses out of this. And essentially what you do is you just place this into an area in the cricket tub for the adult crickets to be able to lay their eggs in. And over the course of the next few days, they're going to get busy and they're digging their little ovipositors or whatever they're called, the little females. They stick their little back ends into the material there, and they'll start depositing eggs. But if that egg box dries out, it'll be no good. Like, you really just need to make sure that it is pretty humid in there. The other thing that I'll do is I'll leave that tub in there for 2 days, and then I'll pull it out and I'll put a lid on it, and I actually go and put it into my Reptile incubator at about 29 degrees for about 7 to 10 days before the actual crickets or the next generation start hatching. During this time, I will actually have the adults in here, and you let them use like 2 or 3 tubs depending on how many crickets I want to try to generate over the course of the week while they're kind of in their primo conditions, like they are sounding like they are here. So, you know, you can get quite a few batches out of just like 50 odd crickets. It's kind of insane, to be honest, as to how that kind of sets out. But yeah, essentially you just want to keep the egg containers or these little parcels, whatever you want to call them, you just want to keep them nice and warm. So with that being said, you know, even if you don't have a Reptile incubator, you could probably leave a sealed container like on top of your bearded dragon enclosure or something like that, where there's just a little bit of residual warmth to make sure those eggs hatch. I mean, we think about it, crickets always hatch out in beardy tanks, right? So it's just about having that moisture, that warmth, and that kind of consistency for that period of time. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm actually going to release these 2 boxes of crickets into this tub, and I'll just quickly give you a bit of a quick look at it, and you can just see how I set up my adults. So yeah guys, this is nothing fancy by any means, but you can see how this is set up here. Lots of space for them to hide and take cover, lots of food for them here, obviously good quality fresh water. If you want to feed them some leafy greens or some carrot or some potato or orange slices, all that sort of stuff, go nuts, there's nothing wrong with it. I'm just trying to go the lazy man route where I really don't have to pay too much attention. Obviously the point where I'm paying attention is at the moment over this course of the next week, every couple of days I'm taking one of these boxes out and replacing it and just putting the the old box in the incubator. But that's all there really is to it. Then after they hatch is the next most important step. So when they hatch, they are a little bit more fragile than, let's say, like a baby woody or something like the sorts of like that. They actually require a fair bit more humidity. So generally what I do is I'll put them into like a smaller container and keep them in a warm room, such as my Reptile room, and I'll put them in something that's got a little bit less ventilation than, say, like a raise-up tub like this one that I've got here. So this one here, there's a little bit less ventilation. Sometimes I might just cover this in with, I don't know, something that's lying around, just for those kind of first 7 to 10 days that the pinheads are actually hatched. That's when they're kind of their most fragile during their molt. You can see here that I don't have like an actual watering container in her per se, and that's just because a lot of their moisture they're actually going to get from the egg box that's still in here. So they're actually able to go and, you know, get their moisture and bury down into this. I might just pop like a piece of carrot or something into this just to keep it simple to start with. And the reason for that is the fact that, you know, sometimes depending on your skills, you can see on my little watering contraption there's a little bit of a hole. So those pinheads might go down into there and end up drowning. So I don't want to have that happen. So essentially, I just try to keep it a little bit simple, and I might just use, some fresh food essentially, you know, even just like a lettuce leaf or something like that for the time being. And basically, once they've been in here for a little bit of time and they kind of look like, you know, maybe like your extra small cricket or something, not so much your pinhead, I'll go and move all of these guys into a big raise-out bin, which really you could do straight up if you wanted to. It's just I'm limited to space, so I tend to start with something that's a little bit smaller. But I'll show you my raise-up bin. Essentially, all it is the same sort of thing, if not bigger than what the adults are in currently. So bit more food, bit more water, that sort of style of thing. But the whole point of all of this is just for me to be as hands-off as possible, basically. So as you can see here, these guys are all going to scatter away and hide, but I've just got 2 food trays there, which I might check every kind of 2 to 3 weeks, thereabouts, something like that. And I've still got the watering container down there. Now, obviously, just because there's a lot of crickets in this tub, like there would be hundreds, if not, yeah, I'd say high hundreds, something like that. The basic thing is, you know, more crickets, more water, that sort of gear. So just keep a bit of an eye on it. You know, every couple of weeks when you think about it, just go and check it. But this is basically just how I raise these guys out. Just simply, you know, I don't try to do anything too hard. This seems to be working for me. These guys are at a small, some are at a kind of like a medium stage now, and that's one of like 3 raise up tubs that I've got going. And that's all from like 50 crickets or so, like, you know, 3 boxes of crickets that I bought from the store. So, you know, you can kind of, you can end up with a lot of crickets if you're kind of doing this, you know, pretty good. These guys obviously like the warmth, so, you know, just make sure you're keeping them ambiently warm. They don't have to be hot, but, you know, if you keep them warm, they'll eat more, then that means they're growing quicker. So, you know, take this for what it's worth. I'm hoping that, you know, at least a few of you are getting a few ideas out there, but you can see how simple these tubs are. There's really nothing to them. So the biggest thing that I've learned, and my biggest takeaway from everything, is to try to make sure that you've got a bit of a cycle going with your crickets and the age, the lifespan sort of thing that they're at, you know. So if you kind of only do 1 batch where you're breeding them, you're only going to have 1 batch that are all one age. That's why I'm trying to stagger things at the moment, just to kind of get back on a bit of a roll where I had it for probably a couple of months there where, you know, I didn't have to buy crickets at all. It was just easy to breed them at home and you know, Bob's your uncle. But it is hard to kind of just get back into that cycle. So, you know, that's probably my biggest takeaway, is if you are going to give this a bit of a crack at home, is just try to kind of stagger your breedings as best as you can. Just keep going and buying a couple of packs here or there, or, you know, contact a good breeder. You know, Cricket King's a really good supplier here in Australia if you do want good quality crickets in bulk. So, you know, reach out to these sorts of places and get some high quality crickets if you can. But yeah, there you go, guys. It's just kind of like a bit of a simple video to hopefully kind of show you how I kind of have like a little bit of a breeding system here. By no means am I an expert. You know, I never claim to be an expert, but that being said, I have had some success doing it this way. So take it for what it's worth. Hopefully you guys have learned something out of it. Hopefully you guys can breed a few crickets for your animals at home. And yeah, hopefully you get a few ideas about how my minimal effort cricket breeding kind of works. You know, if it works for you, that's brilliant. I'd love to hear other ideas to, you know, better myself doing this as well. So if you do have other ideas out there, I'm all ears. But this just seems to be what works for me at the moment, and I can't complain about it at the end of the day. Alright guys, if you did like this video, make sure to drop a comment down below, hit that like button, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more reptile related content. And if you do want to support the channel any further, make sure you go grab yourself some merch off the Teespring store, and you can also follow me over on Patreon for some early access videos as well as some extra content. Till next time guys, take it easy, I'll catch you then.